The island of Saint Helena, in the year 1821. A 51-year-old man walks slowly through the gardens of Longwood House, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lost on the infinite horizon of the South Atlantic. His hair, once perfectly groomed, is now thin and grey. His body, which once commanded armies of 500,000 men, is now swollen and weakened by a mysterious illness that consumes him from within. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who once ruled almost all of Europe. Now a prisoner on a remote island thousands of kilometers from his homeland, in a few weeks he will be dead. But the circumstances of his death remain a mystery that continues to intrigue historians to this day. Was it poisoning, a tropical disease, or simply the broken heart of a man who had lost everything? To understand Napoleon's tragic end, we must return to the year 1815, when his life changed forever. After his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in June of that year, the French emperor was forced to abdicate for the second time. But unlike his first exile on the island of Elba, where he still retained some dignity and hope of return, this time the European powers were determined to ensure that he would never again pose a threat. The destination chosen for the former emperor was Saint Helena, a small volcanic island lost in the middle of the South Atlantic, more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest coast. The choice was no accident. Saint Helena was considered one of the most secure natural prisons in the world, surrounded by rocky cliffs and treacherous waters that made any escape attempt virtually impossible. Napoleon arrived on Saint Helena on October 15, 1815, aboard the British ship HMS Northumberland. His first sight of the island must have been devastating. A piece of dark volcanic rock emerging from the grey waters of the ocean, with no welcoming beaches or harbours, only threatening cliffs and sparse vegetation. Struggling to survive against the constant wind, his new residence was established at Longwood House, a decaying property located on a windswept plateau in the most desolate part of the island. The house, originally built as a summer residence for the lieutenant governor, was in terrible condition when Napoleon arrived. The roofs leaked, the walls were mouldy due to constant humidity, and the relentless wind whistled through poorly sealed window cracks. The British governor responsible for guarding Napoleon was Sir Hudson Lowe, a career military officer known for his rigidity and paranoia. Lowe had received clear instructions from the British government: treat the prisoner with the courtesy due to a former head of state, but ensure that he remained isolated and incapable of communicating with the outside world. This mission soon turned into a psychological war between the two men. From the beginning, Lowe imposed humiliating restrictions on Napoleon. The former emperor was treated as General Bonaparte, not as His Majesty, a deliberate affront that deeply irritated him. His letters were censored, his walks limited to a restricted area of the island, and he was constantly watched by British sentries who reported his every movement to the governor. Napoleon, accustomed to commanding empires and deciding the fate of nations, now found himself reduced to disputing the right to receive visitors or plant a few vegetables in his garden. The constant frustration and humiliation began to affect both his mental and physical health. He developed an obsession with small domestic details, spending hours reorganizing his library or dictating memoirs to his companions in exile. The first symptoms of the illness that would eventually kill him began to appear in 1817. Napoleon started complaining of severe abdominal pain, constant nausea, and extreme fatigue that left him bedridden for days. Initially, he and his personal doctors attributed these symptoms to the tropical climate and the inadequate island diet. But as the months passed, the symptoms intensified alarmingly. Napoleon began to lose weight drastically. His face became pale and gaunt, and he developed bouts of vomiting that lasted for hours. His famous bursts of energy gave way to prolonged periods of lethargy and depression. The man who once marched for miles inspecting his troops could now barely walk to the garden without leaning on a cane. Dr. Francesco Anti, the Corsican physician sent by the Bonaparte family to care for Napoleon, arrived on the island in 1819. His initial diagnosis was pessimistic. The former emperor was suffering from a severe form of liver dysfunction, possibly caused by a combination of the tropical climate, extreme psychological stress, and a diet poor in fresh nutrients. Antimarchy tried several treatments of the time, including bloodletting, purgatives, and a strict diet, but nothing seemed to relieve his patient's growing suffering. Napoleon had become a shadow of his former self. His once robust body was swollen and weak. His eyes had lost the piercing brilliance that intimidated generals and diplomats, and his mind, once as sharp as a blade, now frequently wandered between lucid, political analysis and melancholic musings about the past. During his final years on Saint Helena, Napoleon spent most of his time dictating his memoirs to the Count de Los Cases and other loyal companions who had chosen to share his exile. These sessions became his main activity, a way of constructing his own version of history and perhaps finding some meaning in his dramatic fall from absolute power to total confinement. His memoirs reveal a man consumed by bitterness and regret. Napoleon obsessively analyzed his past decisions, especially the disastrous Russian campaign and his choice to return from exile on Elba. He alternated between defending his actions as necessary for the greatness of France and admitting errors that cost millions of lives and his own freedom. The relationship between Napoleon and Hudson Lowe deteriorated progressively over the years. The governor, initially cautious but respectful, became increasingly hostile as frustration with his mission grew. Lowe resented being responsible for guarding the most famous man in the world on a remote island. Far from the career opportunities he might have had in London, Napoleon, for his part, developed a visceral hatred for Lowe, calling him a butcher and an executioner. In his censored letters, he accused the governor of trying to kill him slowly through constant humiliations and inadequate living conditions. This constant tension certainly contributed to the deterioration of the former emperor's health. In 1820, Napoleon's condition worsened dramatically. He began to experience episodes of delirium during which he relived past battles, giving imaginary orders to generals who were not present. His periods of lucidity became rarer and shorter. During these clear moments, he expressed deep sadness over the fate of his family, and especially over his son, the King of Rome, whom he had not seen since his abdication. The last months of Napoleon's life were marked by intense physical suffering. The abdominal pains became so severe that he spent entire days doubled over in agony, unable to eat or drink properly. His body, once accustomed to the rigors of military campaigns, now completely betrayed him, leaving him dependent on his companions for the most basic needs. In March 1821, Napoleon began dictating his will, a document that revealed both his persistent grandiosity and his vulnerable humanity. He forgave his enemies, expressed love for his family, and in a final demonstration of his contradictory nature, left money to the soldier who had once attempted to assassinate Wellington. The last days of April were particularly cruel. Napoleon alternated between periods of unconsciousness and moments of terrifying lucidity, in which he seemed to fully understand that he was dying far from home, surrounded only by a handful of loyal followers on a godforsaken island. He spoke frequently about Josephine, his first wife, and about the battlefields where he had known his greatest glory. On the morning of May 5, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died at Longwood House. His last words, according to those present, were an almost inaudible whisper. France, army, head of the army. Josephine. Thus ended the life of the man who had redefined Europe and whose name had become synonymous with ambition and military glory. The autopsy performed by British doctors concluded that Napoleon died of stomach cancer, a condition that had also killed his father. However, this official conclusion never completely silenced alternative theories about his death. Many of his followers, including LA's cases, always maintained that he was slowly poisoned by the British as a way to eliminate him without creating an obvious martyr. The poisoning theory gained strength in the 20th century when analyzers of Napoleon's hair revealed elevated levels of arsenic. Some historians argued that small, constant doses of arsenic could have caused the symptoms he displayed during his final years. However, alternative explanations include contamination from arsenic-containing paints, common at the time, or even medications prescribed by his own doctors. Napoleon's body was initially buried in a secluded valley on Saint Helena, beneath a weeping willow that he had admired during his walks. The British government refused to allow any inscription identifying the grave, fearing it would become a pilgrimage site for Bonaparte. For 19 years, the grave remained anonymous, visited only occasionally by colonial officials. In 1840, King Louis-Philippe of France negotiated the return of Napoleon's remains to Paris. The operation, known as the Retour des Cendres, Return of the Ashes, was a national French event of epic proportions. Crowds lined the streets of Paris to witness the funeral procession that carried the former emperor's body to where it rests to this day. Napoleon's end on Saint Helena represents one of history's cruelest ironies. The man who had conquered nearly all of Europe died as a prisoner on a remote island, his final years marked by humiliation, illness, and isolation, and his premature death at the age of 51 deprived the world of seeing how one of the greatest military geniuses in history might have evolved in old age. More than 200 years later, the medical mystery of his death continues to fascinate researchers. Modern technologies have allowed more sophisticated analyses of samples of his hair and other artifacts, but the conclusions remain controversial. What is beyond doubt is that his final years were a physical and psychological torture that transformed the conqueror of Europe into a tragic and melancholic figure. The terrible end of Napoleon Bonaparte serves as a somber reminder that even the most powerful are mortal, and that the wheel of fortune can turn emperors into prisoners and conquerors into exiles. His death on Saint Helena closed not only an extraordinary life, but an entire era of European history, leaving behind a complex legacy of glory and tragedy that continues to fascinate the world to this day.